pre-war isolationism and flawed doctrine led to a critical strategic misstep. This misstep delivered the M4 Sherman to Normandy. The Sherman was now brutally exposed as inferior to German armor. The sheer volume of American production was undeniable. The 60,000th Sherman tank was a testament to industrial might. Yet, this volume meant little on the battlefield. A single German Panther could engage the M4 head-on and destroy it from 2,000 yards. The Sherman had to close the distance to 600 yards. Even then, the crew had to pray for a flank shot. This technological disparity was a constant, terrifying drain on American lives. A solution was born of desperation and battlefield necessity. That solution was radical: field modification. Ordnance crews were already stretched thin. They performed the dual roles of forward repair and training terrified, green replacement crews. Now, they were suddenly thrust into the role of emergency armorers. The M4's side armor was fundamentally vulnerable. Its ammunition storage was prone to catastrophic detonation upon penetration. To address this deadly flaw, the Armor Addition project began. It unfolded in the muddy fields just behind the front lines. This was not factory work. It was a desperate industrial effort. It was performed under the constant threat of German counter-battery fire. Mechanics and welders were tasked with welding intricate patches onto the hulls. They attached external armor boxes onto the vulnerable M4 Shermans. The sheer scale of the task was staggering. They worked around the clock, often in the relentless, chilling rain and sleet. The Norman countryside was a sea of mud. The air was thick with the smell of scorched metal and damp earth. Welders shielded their faces against the blinding flash of the arc. They wrestled with heavy steel plates. They tried to reinforce the glacis plate and the sponsons. These were the critical areas where high-velocity German rounds tore through the thin steel. The author recalled his own experience assisting with this project in England, that cultural friction complicated the initial efforts. They worked alongside British welders who operated at a steady, established pace. The Americans, driven by the immediate terror of the front, demanded speed and ingenuity. Overcoming initial difficulties and cultural misunderstandings was essential. They forged a common, frantic effort to achieve basic parity. These desperate, field-applied patches were often ugly and uneven. They became a physical manifestation of the American soldiers' ingenuity and resilience. They were a necessary, immediate fix to a critical design flaw. They transformed potentially lethal write-offs into marginally survivable fighting machines. This industrial improvisation was driven by gruesome lessons learned at places like Villiers-Fossard. It was the only thing standing between the M4 crews and annihilation. American success in the hedgerow hell would not hinge on superior design. It would hinge on the superhuman effort of the men keeping the flawed machines running. The static, murderous fighting in the Norman hedgerows brought the American armored advance to a standstill. The M4 Sherman was already outmatched. Now it was crippled by the terrain. When attempting to ram the dense earthworks, it reared up. This exposed its vulnerable belly to German anti-tank fire. Necessity, the ultimate mother of invention, demanded a solution. That solution was needed with impossible urgency. The answer arrived in the form of the hedge chopper. This crude, fabricated steel spike assembly was designed to prevent the M4 from elevating. It worked when the tank rammed the hedgerows. It was a game-changer. Its deployment, however, required a superhuman effort. Colonel Cowhey committed to building and installing 57 of these devices. He needed them done overnight. Ordnance maintenance units transformed into frantic, makeshift fabrication shops. Welders worked through the night, their arcs blazing in the damp darkness. They were driven by the knowledge that every minute lost meant more tankers would die the next day. The pressure was immense, and the conditions were brutal. Some welders suffered temporary blindness, as caused by prolonged exposure to the intense, unprotected light of the welding arcs. This single-minded ingenuity, born of desperation, proved immediately decisive. Coupled with this mechanical innovation was a strategic shift, Operation Cobra. On July 26th, the sky filled with the long grey continuum. 3,300 Allied planes dropped 14,000 tons of bombs. This was the largest single bombardment of the war up to that point. The ground transformed into a moonscape of overlapping craters. German defences were utterly neutralised. The combined effect of overwhelming air superiority and the newly equipped hedge choppers shattered the German lines. Two armoured divisions poured through the breach. They advanced 17 miles in just 3 days with minimal losses. This speed was previously unimaginable in the hedgerow country. The breakout was instantaneous and vast. The 3rd Armoured Division, the spearhead of this advance, covered approximately 1460 miles. They drove from Normandy deep into Germany. This rapid, high-speed mechanized campaign created a logistical nightmare. The maintenance challenges were of staggering proportions. The strain on equipment was extreme. The 3rd Armoured Division started combat with 232 M4 Shermans. It would eventually suffer the destruction of 648 tanks. This was an astonishing loss rate of 580%. Sustaining this momentum required a logistical network. It was a network unmatched by any commercial enterprise. The division's success was not rooted in superior tanks. It was rooted in the dedication and ingenuity of its maintenance personnel. In a division of 17,000 troops, nearly 61% were involved in vehicle maintenance. They were involved either directly or indirectly. Constant combat and vast distance required a specialized system. This system had to deliver new vehicles within 48 hours of catastrophic losses. When regulations proved too rigid for the battlefield, ordnance personnel simply ignored them. The concept of cannibalization became the great strength of the United States Army. This meant salvaging usable parts from destroyed tanks to repair others. Battlefield expediency overrode bureaucracy. The sheer scale of the mechanized thrust was difficult to comprehend. A heavy armored division comprised approximately 13,500 men. It included 232 medium tanks and thousands of trucks and half-tracks. On the move, this column could stretch an astonishing 150 miles in single file. This massive, mobile column was the engine of the advance. It was capable of exploiting the massive tactical victory that followed Cobra. The breakthrough led directly to the successful encirclement of the German left flank. The subsequent closure of the Falaise pocket trapped a huge German column. That column included 50 tanks, self-propelled guns, artillery, and hundreds of horse-drawn vehicles. The resulting carnage was immense. The strafing P-47 fighters annihilated the trapped forces. The fields were littered with the remnants of the German 7th Army. Burned bodies of tankers resembled charcoal mannequins. Dead soldiers lay alongside horses still hitched to burning caissons. But the dash through France and Belgium continued. It was spearheaded by the 3rd Armoured Division's relentless speed. They secured key crossings, including the intact bridge at Huy. This allowed the momentum to be maintained. The subsequent envelopment and frontal assault on the fortified city of Liège became a classic example of modern armoured tactics. Combat commands converged from multiple directions. They neutralized German defenses and secured a major strategic objective. Yet, disaster loomed as the supply lines overextended. The relentless autumn rains began. The inherent flaws of the M4 Sherman resurfaced. The ground became saturated. Fields turned into impassable quagmires. The M4's narrow tracks and high ground-bearing pressure caused it to bog down easily. Its engine, the R975 Wright, was prone to fouling spark plugs at low, muddy speeds. The consequences were catastrophic during the November offensive east of Aachen. Armoured divisions were improperly committed to infantry breakthrough roles. Their strength dissipated rapidly in the mud and minefields. The statistics became a grim testament to the failure of doctrine and equipment. Combat Command B lost 48 out of 64 tanks in a minefield. This happened in a terrifying 26 minutes. Two combat commands from the 2nd Armoured Division lost approximately 100 tanks near Jülich. They were lost under similar conditions. These crushing losses highlighted a critical strategic deficiency. The deficiency was the absence of the M26 Pershing. The superior tank would have offered better mobility in the mud. It featured wide tracks and torsion bar suspension. It also offered better protection against German armour. The Pershing remained sidelined. This disastrous decision ensured the cost of the war continued to climb unnecessarily. The cost was measured in American lives and destroyed equipment. The campaign's success was miraculous, but its cost was amplified by every flawed M4 that sunk into the mud. December 16, 1944, the American line was stretched thin and complacent in the Ardennes. This quiet sector was ripped apart by the sheer, terrifying force of the German counter-offensive. The attack was launched along a 60-mile front. It stretched from the Losheim Gap to Luxembourg. It achieved complete surprise. German planning had been brilliant, and security was tight. Critically, the weather cooperated with the Axis. A thick blanket of fog and freezing cloud cover grounded Allied air superiority. This allowed 3 German armies to thrust deep into the American rear. They created the massive, unexpected salient known as the Bulge. The immediate challenges were not just the formidable Panther and King Tiger tanks. The battlefield itself posed a massive threat. Freezing rain, ice, and deep snow transformed the roads. They became treacherous, impassable sheets of solid ice. Armored movement became a nightmare. Tanks were sliding like sleds. Snowdrifts reached 3 feet deep on less used roads. The logistical burden, already staggering, reached catastrophic levels. Columns of 1,200 vehicles could suffer anywhere from 150 to 200 breakdowns. This happened every single night. Inadequate standard combat boots offered poor protection against the relentless water and cold. This led to widespread cases of trench foot. The narrator, Lieutenant Cooper, experienced this brutal reality firsthand. He developed frostbite on his feet, suffering black splotches and severe pain. This condition threatened to remove him permanently from the division he relied on for survival. The 3rd Armoured Division was thrown immediately into the maelstrom. Its Combat Command B, despite being severely under strength, was rushed north to the Stavelot area. The stakes were impossibly high. The Germans' primary objective was the massive, vital American gasoline dump north of Stavelot. This dump contained 3 million gallons of fuel. Kampfgruppe Piper was spearheading the 6th SS Panzer Army with its fearsome King Tigers. If they secured that fuel, their advance to Antwerp would be unstoppable. The defense became a desperate piecemeal fight along the Stavelot, La Glaise, and Stoumont line. American armor and infantry held. They denied Piper the fuel he needed. This forced the Germans to extend their efforts westward, fatally weakening their thrust. Simultaneously, the 3rd Armoured Division executed a rapid redeployment to the Hottenmanhay Gap. They confronted the advancing 5th Panzer Army. Task Force Hogan, under Colonel Hogan, found itself surrounded by 3 German divisions. Yet they held their ground heroically. They disrupted the German timetable and prevented them from exploiting bridgeheads across the Orthe River. The tenacity of these isolated units bought the necessary time. Allied reserves were able to stabilize the flanks. Hogan's final act before escaping was destroying his remaining equipment. His reason for being the last man out was famously simple: his sore feet. As the crisis stabilized, a critical technological shift occurred. It fundamentally altered the nature of the artillery war. Liaison officers were briefed on New Year's Day. The briefing concerned the widespread introduction of the proximity fuse, or VT fuse. This was called the best-kept secret of World War II. This revolutionary technology featured a small, battery-powered radar. It allowed artillery shells to detonate at a predetermined height. The effect was devastating. The M7 self-propelled 105mm howitzer was now equipped with the VT fuse. It could deliver airbursts with lethal precision. The weapon became a horrific anti-personnel machine. It shredded German infantry and neutralized the high-profile open-topped German 88mm dual-purpose guns. The final element of parity was also beginning to arrive. It had been so long delayed by flawed doctrine. The M26 Pershing tank was finally entering the theatre in small numbers. It weighed 47.5 tons and carried a powerful 90mm M3 gun. It was the answer to the Panther and the Tiger. For the first time, American armor was placed on a more level playing field. The ultimate validation came not in the Bulge itself, but shortly after. It symbolized the end of the Sherman's reign of inferiority. In the rubble-strewn streets of Cologne, Staff Sergeant Bob Early commanded one of the first M26 Pershings to see action. His gunner, Corporal Clarence Smoyer, faced a high-tension duel. He was fighting a German Panther tank positioned near the cathedral. The Panther was capable of destroying an M4 from a great distance. Now it was facing its match. Leveraging the M26's superior armament and power traverse turret, Smoyer acquired the target. He fired and destroyed the Panther at a range of 1,000 yards. This was a clean, decisive victory. The M26 finally faced and defeated superior German armor head-on. It was more than just a tactical win. It was the symbolic moment that affirmed the American commitment to quality over quantity. This turning point was purchased with the lives of thousands of Sherman crews. They had fought the war with one hand tied behind their backs. The tide of technology, much like the tide of the battle, was finally turning. The penetration of the Siegfried Line was not a single dramatic charge, it was a slow, grinding process of attrition. It was purchased with blood and steel. After the brutal climax of the Bulge, the 3rd Armoured Division was exhausted. Its remaining 100-odd tanks were worn past the point of endurance. The German defences ranged 40 miles deep in places. They formed a concrete labyrinth of pillboxes and dragon's teeth. The intense fighting in the Rhineland demanded a specific tank. It needed to be a tank that could finally match the formidable King Tiger and Panther head-on. The answer arrived in the form of a technological aberration, the Super Pershing M26A1E2. This was not a production model, it was a unique, field-modified experiment. It represented a desperate, last-minute attempt to achieve parity. Ordnance crews took a standard Pershing. They bolted on heavy, laminated 1.5-inch boilerplate to its glacis that adapted a mantlet salvaged from a knocked-out German Panther. The result was a monstrous machine, 7 tons heavier than the original. Its powerful, high-velocity 90mm T-15E1 gun barrel sagged slightly forward from the weight. This gave the tank the menacing appearance of a bull elephant. The crew of the 33rd Armoured Regiment gladly accepted the inconvenience. They knew this behemoth increased their chance of survival exponentially. They felt safer in the Super Pershing than in any Sherman. They were willing to endure its quirks for the sheer psychological and physical advantage it offered. Its firepower was validated in a test firing against a captured Jagd Panzer IV assault gun. The 90mm projectile penetrated the enemy armour and crankshaft. This was achieved from 1.5 miles away. The strategic landscape was irrevocably altered on March 7, 1945. This change was driven by the tactical miracle at the Rhine. The 9th Armoured Division advanced unexpectedly fast. They found the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen still standing. Its immediate capture provided the Allies with a crucial, unimpeded crossing of the Rhine. This was the last major natural barrier protecting the German heartland. This single event fundamentally accelerated the final offensive. It created a deep salient that the Germans could not ignore. The breakthrough immediately sparked fierce political friction within Allied command. Field Marshal Montgomery insisted on full control over the strategic thrust. But Eisenhower recognized the immense opportunity. He prioritized the American 12th Army Group. The decision ensured the final offensive would be an American-led sprint into the Reich. The final strategy was the rapid double envelopment of the industrial heartland. The 1st and 9th Armies launched a massive, coordinated drive. Their goal was to circle the Ruhr pocket. The 3rd Armoured Division, spearheading the 1st Army, achieved its longest armoured advance in a single 24-hour period. They covered over 90 miles. This rapid dash shattered German defensive lines. But it created a perilous situation for the supporting units, the ordnance and maintenance personnel. This deep penetration meant operating in a deadly void. Small maintenance platoons were detached from the main force. They were left miles behind the advancing spearheads. They were entirely isolated and surrounded by disorganized, desperate pockets of German resistance. In the constant chaos of the rapid advance, they became their own security force. Their only mission was to recover and repair battle-damaged vehicles. Working around the clock under sporadic fire, they relied on ingenuity and cannibalization. They knew a successful repair meant the difference between survival and being overrun by retreating German units. This was the unseen, critical effort that sustained the momentum. On April 1st, the 2nd and 3rd Armoured Divisions met at Lippstadt. They successfully sealed the Ruhr pocket. The collapse was catastrophic. The encirclement trapped major elements of 2 German armies. This included Army Group B headquarters. Approximately 380,000 German soldiers were captured. This remains the largest single group surrender of the war. Field Marshal Model, the commander of Army Group B, committed suicide rather than face capture. His death symbolized the definitive end of organized resistance in the West. But as the military victory peaked, the moral horror of the regime was laid bare. On April 11th, Combat Command B entered the Nordhausen concentration camp. The scene was beyond comprehension. Piles of skeletal corpses were stacked like cordwood. Approximately 3,000 bodies lay there, and the stench was overwhelming. Only a fraction of the inmates were initially alive. They were gaunt figures described as live walking ghosts. The shock to the hardened American soldiers was profound. General Collins ordered that able-bodied German civilians be rounded up. They were forced to bury the victims. This was a grim, necessary confrontation with the barbarity committed in their name. Amidst the blood and gore inside a blast-damaged tank, technician 5th grade Smith volunteered to clean the interior. Smith was a fire control instrument repair mechanic that was driven by the simple, profound desire for the fallen soldiers to receive a decent Christian burial. This was a stark moment of humanity amidst the absolute depravity. Even in defeat, the technological race continued. The rapid advance secured immense spoils. The capture of Dachau yielded critical Luftwaffe research, but the greatest prize was the V2 rocket manufacturing and supply center at Nordhausen. This elaborate underground factory was 600 feet deep. Colonel John Madaris, 1st Army's Chief of Ordnance, recognized the significance instantly. 50 railroad cars were loaded with rockets and rocket assemblies. This military contraband became legal loot. It formed the direct foundation for the post-war United States space program. The speed of the advance had secured a future technological advantage. The end came swiftly. On April 26th, American forces drove relentlessly to the Mulde River. They met the advancing Soviet forces at Torgau. This sealed the division of Germany into agreed-upon occupation zones. The fighting finally ceased on May 7, 1945. General Jodl signed the unconditional surrender. The formal ceremony followed in Berlin on May 8, VE Day. The immense psychological burden lifted from the exhausted soldiers. They had lived for months with the constant threat of sudden random death. They felt as if they had been reprieved from death row. The conflict left behind cities reduced to rubble, like Darmstadt. There, an Allied bombing raid had created a firestorm that killed over 40,000 civilians. The cost of victory had been staggering. It was purchased by the resilience of the American soldier and the ingenuity of the maintenance crews. But the war's end was just the beginning of a new, complex challenge. This included occupation and reconstruction. It also demanded an immense psychological reckoning with the horrors they had witnessed. This experience would define them for the rest of their lives.